What's happening? I don't know what's happening! We're losing control of the aircraft here! We lost all control of the aircraft!
On a calm night in June 2009, Air France Flight 447 took off from Rio de Janeiro, heading to Paris. The passengers were relaxed, enjoying the long-haul journey over the Atlantic. But just hours later, the aircraft disappeared from radar, leaving behind no distress call, no explanation, and a haunting silence. When the world woke up to the news, it was the beginning of one of aviation's most baffling mysteries. What caused a modern jetliner with 228 people on board to vanish so suddenly? The Airbus A330-203 used for Flight 447, designated FGZCP, was among the most reliable and advanced aircraft of its time. Delivered to Air France in 2005, it had logged over 18,000 flight hours across 2,644 flights by the night of June 1, 2009. Powered by General Electric CF680E1A3 engines, the A330 was designed to handle long-haul routes with ease. Equipped with modern autopilot systems, navigation technology, and rigorous safety features, the A330 was considered a workhorse of the aviation industry. However, even the most advanced machines are not immune to failure, especially when nature, technology, and human error collide in the most unexpected ways. The flight crew of Air France Flight 447 were well-trained professionals with extensive experience. Captain Marc Dubois, a 58-year-old veteran pilot, had accumulated over 11,000 flight hours during his career. Known for his steady demeanor and skill, he had flown everything from smaller Cessna planes to larger commercial aircraft like the Airbus A340. That night, Captain Dubois was joined by two first officers, David Robert, 37, and Pierre-Cédric Bonin, 32. Robert, with 6,500 flight hours, was considered highly competent, having worked for both Air France and Air Calédonie. Bonin, the youngest and least experienced of the trio, had logged just under 3,000 hours. Despite this, he was regarded as a capable pilot, having graduated from one of France's top aviation schools. Together, the crew represented a mix of experience and fresh expertise, ready to manage the challenges of the transatlantic route. At 7:29 p.m. Brazilian time, Air France Flight 447 lifted off from Rio de Janeiro's Galeão International Airport. The departure was uneventful, and the plane climbed steadily to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Inside the cabin, passengers settled in for the 11-hour journey. Some watched movies, others dozed off, and a few enjoyed conversations over meals and drinks. In the cockpit, the crew worked seamlessly, navigating the route with the assistance of the aircraft's autopilot. The weather, however, hinted at potential trouble ahead. The flight path would take the aircraft through the Intertropical Convergence Zone, a region near the equator notorious for its unpredictable weather. Thunderstorms and turbulence were common here, often requiring pilots to carefully adjust their routes. Nonetheless, this was not unusual for transatlantic flights, and the crew prepared to make necessary adjustments as they approached the area. At around 1:45 a.m., the captain took a scheduled break, handing over control to First Officers Bonin and Robert. This arrangement allowed the pilots to rest during long flights, ensuring they remained alert for critical phases like descent and landing. As the aircraft approached a patch of thunderstorms, Bonin made slight adjustments to the autopilot's heading to avoid the worst of the weather. By 2:10 a.m., the autopilot suddenly disengaged. This was not entirely unexpected. Temporary disengagements can occur when airspeed sensors, known as pitot tubes, are blocked by ice. However, such events are usually manageable. The plane's autopilot and auto-thrust systems rely on accurate airspeed data, and when this information becomes unreliable, the systems switch off, handing full control to the pilots. Bonin, seated in the right-hand seat, took manual control and announced, "I have control." This simple phrase marked the beginning of a series of critical decisions, some made in confusion, others in error, that would ultimately lead to disaster. The turning point in the tragedy of Air France. Flight 447 came when the autopilot disengaged at 2:10 a.m., leaving the aircraft in the hands of First Officer Pierre-Cédric Bonin. This sudden shift from automated flight to manual control was not unusual in itself. Temporary autopilot disengagements were a known phenomenon, especially in areas with extreme weather. Yet, in the darkness of the night, above the vast and featureless Atlantic Ocean, even experienced pilots can find themselves overwhelmed by a cascade of alarms, warnings, and conflicting instrument readings. Bonin, only 32 years old and the least experienced of the three pilots, was immediately thrust into a situation that demanded clarity and precision. He instinctively pulled back on the control stick, believing the plane needed to climb to stabilize. This decision, though well-intentioned, marked the beginning of a fatal chain of events. As the nose pitched upward, the aircraft began to lose speed. In aviation, speed is life, and without sufficient airspeed, an aircraft's ability to generate lift is compromised. But Bonin was unaware that his actions were setting the plane on a dangerous trajectory. David Robert, the relief first officer, sat next to Bonin, observing the instruments and trying to make sense of the situation. He voiced his concerns, urging Bonin to monitor the speed and maintain control, but the cockpit communication was fragmented and unclear. During this confusion, no one explicitly acknowledged or addressed the fact that the plane was at risk of entering an aerodynamic stall, a condition where the wings could no longer produce lift. Despite the stall warning sounding repeatedly, its significance seemed lost in the chaos. When Captain Marc Dubois returned to the cockpit, he found a situation spiraling out of control. His experience and authority could have provided the guidance needed to avert disaster, but by then, the flight path had already reached a critical point. The lack of clarity among the crew about who was in charge only compounded the confusion. Three skilled pilots were now locked in a high-stakes struggle with a machine designed to keep them safe, yet none of them seemed able to grasp the true nature of the crisis. As the plane entered a stall, the nose remained pitched upward and the engines roared at full power, but the aircraft was not climbing. Instead, it began a rapid descent. At this point, the cockpit was a cacophony of alarms, with the stall warning blaring intermittently and the altitude indicators showing a terrifying drop. The A330 was falling through the sky, but the pilots did not seem to realize that their actions were exacerbating the problem. The descent was steep and uncontrolled, with the plane losing altitude at a staggering rate of over 10,000 feet per minute. To the pilots, the situation was incomprehensible. Their training had not prepared them for such a scenario, and the complexity of the automated systems they relied on added to their confusion. Instead of lowering the nose to regain airspeed and break the stall, Bonin continued to pull back on the controls, keeping the plane in its stalled state. Robert, seated to Bonin's left, tried to intervene, suggesting changes and questioning Bonin's actions, but his voice was one of many in the chaotic cockpit. Captain Dubois, standing behind them, attempted to assess the situation, but his absence during the critical moments leading up to the stall left him at a disadvantage. As the aircraft plummeted through the sky, the crew's fragmented communication and lack of situational awareness sealed their fate. At an altitude of 10,000 feet, with the ocean rapidly approaching, Bonin finally admitted what he had been doing all along. "I've had the stick all the way back for a while," he confessed. This revelation came too late. The A330 was now in an irrecoverable position, its engines screaming and its wings useless. The descent continued, and the end was inevitable. In the last moments before impact, the atmosphere in the cockpit shifted from confusion to desperation. All three pilots made frantic attempts to regain control, but the aircraft remained unresponsive. Their final words, captured by the cockpit voice recorder, reveal a heartbreaking mix of disbelief and resignation. "Come on, pull up, pull up, pull up!" Bonin shouted, his voice filled with panic. Robert, in a tone of grim certainty, declared, "We are dead." Captain Dubois, with all his years of experience, could only offer one last directive. 10 degrees of pitch. These were his final instructions, a faint hope that some semblance of control might be restored in the seconds that remained. But the reality was undeniable. At 2:14 a.m., Air France Flight 447 slammed into the Atlantic Ocean at a speed of 152 knots with a nose-up angle of 16 degrees. The impact shattered the aircraft, killing all 228 people on board instantly. The vast expanse of the Atlantic swallowed the wreckage, leaving behind only fragments of debris and the haunting silence of a tragedy that had unfolded in mere minutes. The finality of the crash was devastating, but it was only the beginning of a years-long journey to uncover what had gone wrong and how such a disaster could be prevented in the future. In the hours after the crash, as dawn broke over the Atlantic, air traffic controllers and Air France officials began to piece together the reality that Flight 447 had vanished. Initially, there was hope that the aircraft might have diverted due to technical issues or weather. But as time passed with no communication from the flight, the grim realization set in. The plane had likely gone down somewhere in the ocean. A massive search operation was launched, involving military ships, aircraft, and international resources. The initial focus was on finding survivors, though the vastness of the ocean and the lack of precise information about the plane's location made the task daunting. By June 6th, search teams began recovering bodies and pieces of the aircraft from the water, confirming the worst fears. Despite these recoveries, the most crucial pieces of evidence, the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, commonly known as the black boxes, remained missing. These devices, designed to withstand extreme conditions and emit signals for 30 days, held the key to understanding what had happened during the final moments of the flight. The search for these black boxes became an international effort, employing advanced underwater vehicles and sonar equipment. For months, the ocean yielded no answers. It wasn't until 2011, nearly 2 years after the crash, that search teams, using cutting-edge technology, located the wreckage on the ocean floor. The black boxes were recovered from a depth of over 13,000 feet, a testament to the perseverance of the search teams. Their discovery marked a breakthrough in the investigation, providing the data needed to unravel the mystery of Flight 447. The analysis of the black boxes painted a sobering picture of the events leading to the crash. The investigation, led by France's Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, BEA, revealed that the disaster was not the result of a single catastrophic failure, but a series of interconnected factors. The initial trigger was the icing of the pitot tubes, which measure airspeed. These sensors became blocked by ice crystals, causing the autopilot to disengage and leaving the pilots with incorrect airspeed readings. While this technical issue was significant, it was not inherently fatal. Pilots are trained to handle such scenarios by relying on backup instruments and maintaining steady control until the sensors clear. However, the investigation highlighted a critical gap in the crew's understanding and training. Bonin's decision to pull back on the controls was a fundamental mistake that turned a manageable situation into a catastrophe. Compounding this was the crew's apparent inability to recognize that the aircraft was in a stall. Despite the repeated stall warnings, their actions indicated a lack of awareness of what was happening. Instead of lowering the nose to regain airspeed and lift, they kept the plane in a nose-up position, perpetuating the stall. The cockpit's chaotic environment and the lack of clear communication among the pilots further contributed to the tragedy. The BEA's report was a stark reminder of the dangers of over-reliance on automated systems. Modern aircraft, like the Airbus A330, are designed to minimize human error, but this incident revealed the unintended consequences of such reliance. When automation fails, pilots must be able to take manual control and make critical decisions under pressure. the events of Flight 447 underscored the need for a renewed focus on manual flying skills and situational awareness in pilot training. The crash of Air France Flight 447 sent shockwaves through the aviation industry and the public. The loss of 228 lives was a devastating reminder of the fragility of human flight and the profound responsibility borne by those who make it possible. In the wake of the tragedy, Air France and Airbus faced intense scrutiny, with both companies charged with manslaughter. In 2023, a French court acquitted them, placing primary responsibility on pilot error. This verdict, however, did little to console the victims' families, many of whom believed that systemic issues and corporate negligence also played a role. In response to the crash, Air France implemented immediate changes to its fleet, replacing pitot tubes with models less susceptible to icing. The incident also prompted a global re-evaluation of pilot training programs. Emphasis was placed on teaching stall recovery techniques, manual flying skills, and effective cockpit communication. Airlines and regulatory bodies recognized the need to prepare pilots for situations where automated systems fail and human judgment becomes the ultimate safeguard. The story of Flight 447 is a haunting reminder of the complexities of aviation. It highlights the interplay between human error, technological reliance, and the unpredictable forces of nature. Most importantly, it honors the memory of the 228 lives lost that night, each one a reminder of the profound responsibility that comes with flight.